Today on Cryptic Mass Guitar, we do a comparison between the Gibson Les Paul Special TV Yellow, I'm partially colorblind and using AI color correction, so hopefully this isn't green, and the Gibson Les Paul Standard 60s. Now, I like saying this in every single one of these comparison videos, but YouTube videos are fantastic. It's a great way of you actually seeing and hearing someone play the guitar that you might be looking to buy. But it's in someone else's hands, someone else's choices for settings, amps, and what they're even playing. So you can't really reach in and, touch them and play them and see what they work or if they work for you. So the best thing to do would be to just use it as a different perspective. You can hear someone else's ideas on the guitar, but don't use it as the sole reason as to buying a guitar. Go into the store and play it for yourself. Play a whole bunch of other guitars too. You never know what one will speak to you. But I do have 5 sound samples for you today in 5 different tunings with 5 different amps, and because this is this channel here, the last one is a full-on metal sound sample. Alright, so that's it for all of the different sound samples here. So at this point, I like to talk about the specs and then give you just my perspective on both of these guitars, my thoughts on this and that. Just so, you know, you have an alternate way of looking at the guitar before you try it out in the store and see if it works for you. So as far as specs, both of these are gloss nitro finish. We have a mahogany body here, a slab mahogany body on the Les Paul Special, whereas the standard is a slab mahogany body with a carved maple top on top of it. That's right, a lot of people do consider this as a half a Les Paul because it's the back of a Les Paul without the carved maple top on it. Both have glossed nitro finish mahogany necks. The Special here has the 50s chunky C-neck on it, whereas the standard 60s has the 60s slim taper profile. So that is sort of like a hybrid between a 59 medium C and a blade style 60s neck. So it's meets somewhere in the middle. Both also have bound rosewood fretboards. However, the Special, as it should, has the dot inlays as it's a stripped back guitar, whereas the standard has the trapezoid inlays. On the front of the headstock is where you're going to find the inlaid Gibson logo and the silkscreen Les Paul logo. However, the Special actually says Les Paul Special, whereas the standard says Les Paul Model. The truss rod cover here, the standard says standard, and it also comes with a blank to sort of be like the originals, whereas the Special just has the blank. On the back of the headstock, we're able to look at the tuners here. So the Special has the Gibson Vintage Deluxe tuners with the oval buttons, whereas the standard 60s has the Grover Rotomatic tuners. They're not locking tuners, but they're Grover style, so they're a little different here. You have a little more options on tightening or loosening the tuning button here, so it'll tune a little harder or a little easier. Because the standard 60s, the way that they like to set it apart from the 50s, part of it is obviously the tuners other than pickups. They sort of treat it like it's a hot-rodded or a typical upgrade that you would see on like a 1960 Les Paul. Whereas a traditional 1960 Les Paul would have the Kluson Vintage Deluxe tuners with the double rings. Both guitars have 2 volumes and 2 tones. They're also hand soldered with orange drop capacitors. A little more important on the Les Paul Special. For most people. And they also have a toggle switch, a 3-way toggle switch. Jeez, Ryan. And those control the P90 pickups on the Les Paul Special and the 61R and 61T, so the 60s burst buckers, on the Les Paul Standard 60s. And finally, onto the bridges here. We have the non-compensated wraparound here on the Les Paul Special, and the ABR1 Tune-O-Matic and stop bar on the standard 60s. Now we'll get into my opinions here on both of these guitars, and it's pretty simple. I do prefer the standard 60s over the Special here, and it's not for reasons that most people would think. It's not because that, you know, the standard 60s has the humbuckers, has a Tune-O-Matic, those sort of things. Has nothing to do with that. It's the fact that I have a lot of Les Pauls and I'm very, very used to Les Pauls. So going from a full-bodied Les Paul to the whole, just the back of a Les Paul is a little off-putting for me. I don't find it like, you know, oh, I don't like playing it or anything like that. It is just something that is severely noticeable, which is good, but it sort of takes me out of things for, like, you know, a little bit while playing it. I also much prefer the non-compensated wraparound over the lightning bar that's on the SG Special. However, one thing to note, I love the SG Special. The SG Special is basically just a 1961 with the different accoutrements to it. As far as, like, I'm in the process of actually upgrading my guitars to the Custom Shop reissues. I've ordered a 1963 SG Special VOS. It still has the lightning bar, but I'm not going to be ordering a Les Paul Special VOS. That's just something out of preference for me. I prefer the full-bodied Les Pauls. So for me, I have a 1956 VOS, very chunky neck. And once time comes for it, I'll be upgrading this actually to the 1954 VOS because it has the same tailpiece. but it's a full-bodied Les Paul. I usually get asked about the bridge itself because as far as intonation, there's 2 screws, you can, bring it back and forth. However, like fine-tuning adjustments and stuff like that, it's just not really a thing. For the most part, people don't usually care. Like the juniors and the specials, you just call them rockers and go on with your life because you learn a lot from them, because you're actually going to be messing around with the volume and the tone controls. So the capacitors actually come into play a little more on P90s for most people, whereas you'll usually leave your tone and volume on stun with humbuckers for 95% of people, so the capacitors don't really come into play. But as far as the bridge, a lot of people are concerned over the fact that there's not a lot of intonation ability to it. So there's things like the Tone Pros, the Gibson wraparound tailpiece, which actually has individual saddles that are adjustable. I had that and I found that to be very bulky. What I did find worked a little better, even though it's still not, like it's compensated versus non-compensated. But the Music City bridge, like the Savvy is what it's called, that's what most people usually upgrade to because it keeps things light. It's not bulky. It doesn't have the individual saddles, but because it's compensated, it's sort of like the Lightning Bar. It just helps your intonation that much more. As far as the 1960s, it's a beautiful non-weight relieved Les Paul. To me, it's always been that runner-up to the standard 50s for my favorite in the regular USA range. The pickups here, the 61R and the 61T, little bit more hotter than the Burstbucker 2-in-1, and there's a little more emphasis on the low end and the high end. It's not scoop by any means, but there's just that little bit much more difference and more emphasis. So you just have to go onto your amp and adjust that, I find. And the slim taper neck here, again, 60s slim taper, a little thicker than the traditional, like millimeters thicker, but it's very comfortable to play on, and for a lot of people it's just that very familiar neck pattern and feels like home to a lot of people. I'd also be remiss if I don't talk about the punch and that oomph that you get, that raw power that you get from a Bridge P90. Rock and high gain in a studio environment especially, this is just fantastic. Add this to a mix with a humbucker and your mix will really come alive. Whereas with the neck, it really has that deep low end to it, and depending on how you actually use your volume and your tone, you can get some very sweet, and not a word I would generally use, soulful tones out of it. Either way, both guitars are fantastic choices, as this might be a little better for high gain. As a main guitar, this would definitely be a great runner-up as a secondary or just a studio guitar that you'll probably spend a whole heck of a lot of time on. Thanks for watching.